Testing. 1, 2, 3. Testing. How's the sound and the video? I'm not getting any video on my YouTube page at all. Sound all good? The video's good too, Laura? Can see and hear me. Okay. I like that. I had to go through a bunch of changes on XSplit again. Okay. All right. There we are. Okay, so across the top of the screen right now, my text is scrolling, welcome new fish keepers. I'm mainly interested in, welcome to the stream, Laura, Daryl, Heather Nielsen. I'm mainly interested in the next few weeks, maybe 3 months worth or something like that, of doing these live streams and some of my videos on trying to help out new fish keepers in the hobby. I really appreciate, I mean, if you guys have normal questions that you want to ask, we can always do that. So at any point in time, if you've got a topic that you need to bring up, then please do that, and we will segue into that too. But what I would really like to do for a little while is to welcome new fish keepers to the hobby and try to give them a helping hand as much as is possible through anecdotal advice, through experience. And all of you guys have also gone through this process. So anything you can add in chat that would proffer advice to new fish keepers. Hey Joel, welcome to the stream, man. Would be, you know, because chat is running alongside this video. So if you guys add your advice in the chat, then new fish keepers will be able to listen to my rambling and watch your advice on the side. And the first thing that I would like to do is to welcome anybody that has, you know, they've taken their child to the pet store. The child fell in love with a goldfish and said, "Oh, Daddy, please buy me a goldfish," or "Oh, Mommy, please buy me a goldfish. I want this one right here with a spot on it," or the guppies, or whatever it is, whatever the reason is behind you suddenly becoming a fish keeper with perhaps no foreknowledge, no study, no research, nothing. You just happen to go to a big box pet store or your local pet store to pick up something for your cat, and either you or your child or your grandchild or your niece or your nephew suddenly wants a fish, or you see a fish and decide that you want to try keeping that fish. So in most cases, the pet store or the big box store or your local fish store will try to sell you a tank or a bowl as a setup, or if you're at Walmart's or some other big box store that's not pet related but has pet stuff, there is going to be on the shelves the things that you need to keep a fish. And depending on which store you're in, you may have a better selection or a worse selection. But let's say you get a goldfish and a 5-gallon tank, and the salesperson sells you a filter, a hang on back filter, and your child wants a bubbling treasure chest and an airplane piece of decoration that's an airplane. So you have suddenly entered the world of fish keeping. And I would like to welcome everyone. You know, this could be Christmas, this could be birthday, this could be any day of the week, just random. But I would like to welcome those people that are new to the fish hobby and offer as best as we can advice to them to help their fish survive, thrive, and for the hobby to become an enjoyable process for them, whether they just want to keep this goldfish or whether they get bitten by the bug that most of us have gotten bitten by, and MTS sets in, and suddenly the whole world of fish that are available out there becomes something that they can't resist. And all of us know this process. All of us that are here regularly have been through this. We have discovered this hobby. And people that are just beginning need to know that there are hundreds of thousands of us out here that have been through this experience, that have learned over years or decades, or in some case, for some of us, eons, that this hobby. Hey, Cobwebs Cavern. Hey, welcome to the stream. This hobby can be one of the most enjoyable experiences that I personally know of in the world of quote hobbies. There are lots of hobbies, lots of different kinds of things that can be enjoyable pastimes. But I don't know any hobby that has as much depth to it as this one does, because it encompasses the sciences, it encompasses nature, it encompasses living things, it encompasses a camaraderie that develops between like-minded people that are also in this hobby. And no matter where you are in the world, there is someone not that far away from you who is also keeping fish. There is some club that you can join within a relative sphere around you. You know, maybe it's 4 cities away, maybe it's in the big city that you're near. It is not that hard, if you really look, to find like-minded people in this hobby all around you. And I want to tell people that so that they can understand that they are not alone in this, that there are people out here on the web, there's people on the open internet sites, There's people on YouTube, there's people on Pinterest, all of the social media. There are people that keep fish and people that love fish. So there is a vast amount of information to help you become more efficient at this hobby out there. And when we get to the research section of this, little welcoming new fish keepers, I plan to do research in stock, the fish themselves and the research. I think we can spend a whole lot of time on social media and on what is available out there to help you. Hey, V-Stag, welcome to the stream, man. And things are going along okay, man. Being old is rough, but we're doing as well as can be expected. So what I'd like to do is to introduce this hobby to new fish keepers, people that have gone out and bought a goldfish bowl, or people that have gone out and bought a 5,000 gallon aquarium and have it stocked by some company. I would like to first discuss water, because my channel's named Water, and I think that basically fish keeping is taking care of the water in our fish tanks so that our fish can thrive on their own. I mean, we have to feed them, we have to treat them with medication at certain times, but basically as fish keepers, what we do is take care of the water. And so I think that it's incumbent on us as people that are trying to help. We have experience. We've been in the hobby for a while. We've been studying the hobby for a while. If we're going to try to help new fish keepers, then it's incumbent on us to talk about what is required to take care of the water in the tanks. Because that's where the fish live. That's what they need is excellent water so that they can do more than just survive. They can thrive. And there are countless ways for us to discuss water and the water changes, the water chemistry, the nitrogen cycle. It just goes on and on and on and on. So, new fish keeper bringing home a bag with a goldfish in it and a 5-gallon tank with a filter, hang on back 5-gallon filter, and some decorations and a little air pump and a bubbling treasure chest. And you go home, you fill the tank up with water from your tap, you add the chemicals that they've given you, which in this case, in this day and age, should be a starter that has nitrifying bacteria in it, and it should also be a dechlor. So first you want to put the water in the tank, then you want to add the dechlor, then start up your filter and start your bubbler up. You know, you've got some substrate in the tank, and your clown puke gravel or your regular gravel or whatever it is, and then you want to add your safe start to this tank. And the safe start will, and I'm using the brand name Safe Start because that's the one that I have on my head right now. There are many different types, and many of them are not effective, and many of them are. And it's based on the type of nitrifying bacteria that are in the product. And with a little bit of research, you could figure out which are the proper nitrifying bacteria to be in a safe start type chemical. I mean, basically, it's just nitrifying bacteria of different types suspended in water with a little bit of sugar, I think, in there to keep them alive so that they continue to exist in the tank. And these bacteria exist everywhere. Hey, fish tropic, welcome to the stream, man. These bacteria exist everywhere in nature. You can add chlorinated water to a tank, put a couple of filters on that tank, and let them run, and eventually the chlorine will gas off, and the ammonia that's created from the leftover will be colonized by these same nitrifying bacteria, and they will convert that ammonia into nitrate, and then nitrate converting bacteria will colonize, and they will convert that nitrate into nitrite. And the only way to get rid of nitrite is through water changes. So that's the nitrogen cycle. And new fish keepers need to understand a little bit about the basics of the nitrogen cycle so that they can recognize what's going on in their tank. So they come home, the fish is still in a bag, they add their water, they add their dechlor, they set up the tank and start their filters running, and then they add their Safe Start or whichever brand of nitrifying bacteria that they got from the store to add to the water. Now, if they don't use Safe Start, what's going to happen is they're going to put that fish in the water, and that water is going to accumulate ammonia from the fish itself expelling waste, from potentially overfeeding that fish. If you've got a child involved, children will grab a handful of food and shower it down on one little goldfish. And goldfish are pretty greedy. They'll eat a lot, but they're not going to eat all of it. And what's going to happen is a lot of that food is going to sit in the substrate and rot and create ammonia. And all of that ammonia that's being created is going to be colonized by nitrifying bacteria. And when you have a bacteria bloom in a tank, the tank is going to look really cloudy. And what that is the nitrifying bacteria reaching, yeah, water pigs, exactly. That water is going to look milky. It's going to be very cloudy. You're almost not going to be able to see through it. And what that is the nitrifying bacteria reaching full bloom. The full amount of ammonia and waste that's in that tank will create a colony of bacteria that is able to consume all of it. So the bacteria will grow like crazy and create a cloudy water situation. There's so much bacteria in the water that you can't really see through it. I mean, you can. It's not opaque, but it is very cloudy, very, very cloudy. The problem is that the fish will have a hard time surviving this situation. Some fish do survive. The old school method of starting a tank was to set it all up, dechlor the water, and throw a couple of fish in for them to start producing waste. And if they do survive the bacteria bloom or blooms, that's great. If they don't survive the bacteria blooms, then you just pull them out, and by just throwing a couple of fish in, a feeder goldfish, a feeder rosy barb, a couple of cheap guppies, it doesn't really matter, but you don't want to spend a lot of money on fish that might die. But in this modern day and age, we have methods which can make it less troublesome on fish. You can add pure ammonia to the tank without any fish in it and create the same nitrifying bacteria bloom to get the cycle started. And then once that bloom has come on and then faded, and what happens is there's not enough food to feed that whole bloom of bacteria, and so they will begin to die off back to whatever the load on the tank is, and the water will clear again, and that's when you can add a fish or a couple of fish safely. You don't want to add a bunch of fish at that time, because that will just create a secondary bloom when all those fish begin producing waste, when they're fed and food rots. The nitrogen cycle in your fish tank is one of the first things that fish keepers need to be aware of. You can circumvent partially by using a Safe Start product. You can also circumvent, and most old school fish keepers know this by heart, they've got a sponge filter that's been in a tank running for a long time. They will take that sponge filter, pull it out of the tank that it's in, and squeeze it out in the new tank. And that sponge filter will be covered with all of the nitrifying bacteria that are needed for that tank to cycle itself, and you will get a bloom shortly after, and you can start a tank just by squeezing a sponge that has been in a mature tank in that tank. It'll make a lot of cloudy water. Your filters will eventually pull that out, and it will settle into the substrate, and the bacteria that were on that sponge filter will start the whole system working. You can add a pinch of flake food if you're just trying to cycle a tank, but it's going to be rough to do that with the fish in the tank already. Not to say that it can't be done, not to say that they can't survive. They can. But my best piece of advice for a new fish keeper is to take that goldfish that you bought back to the store and tell them that you want them to hold it for 30 days. That you bought it and it's yours, but you want them to keep it in their tank until you get a chance to cycle your new tank. And it might be 2 weeks, it might be 10 days. It can happen rather quickly, but a lot of times it will take up to a month. And when I set up my 110 gallon after being dry for 4 or 5 years, it took almost 3 months for that tank to fully cycle. I had already added fish to the tank before it fully cycled. So sometimes, depending on your water, depending on the conditions, the temperature, it can take more than a month to really get a full nitrogen cycle established in a tank. One of the other things about water that's important, and don't for a minute think that you can't, as a new quote quote fish keeper, just buy a fish and put it in a tank and watch it, and then in a couple of months it dies, and if your child is no longer interested in the, you just flush the fish down the toilet and put the bowl away and you're done with fish keeping. That was your entire fish keeping experience. That's completely viable, and the stores will be glad to sell you the products for that experience. But that is the very smallest tip of the experience that fish keeping offers. And if your child or if you get bitten by the same bug that have bitten all of us, and you can look all over YouTube and find plenty of people that have been bitten by the fish keeper bug, that have fallen in love with keeping fish, have fallen in love with the science involved in keeping fish, have fallen in love with breeding fish, maybe selling fish back to stores or to other hobbyists, or have fallen in love with the camaraderie that is available among all the people around the world who keep fish. Then you begin to look for more information. You want to know more about this hobby. You want to know more about the fish, and learning more about the fish will create situations where you see that this fish that you love requires this pH. And for new hobbyists, pH is per hydrogen. How many hydrogen molecules are in this water? That is the pH. And I'm simplifying this a great deal, but the science behind pH, the science behind water chemistry is a pretty deep thing. It's something that sometimes it's hard to put your finger on exactly what's going on. Sometimes it throws curves at even a old hand at fish keeping, because mostly pH is based around the carbonate hardness of water. You will find, if you buy an advanced water testing kit, that it will offer you, some of them, an ammonia test kit to tell you how much ammonia is in your water, which if you've got fish in a tank, you don't want ammonia in your water. It's deadly to fish. It will burn their gills. It will kill them very shortly. You will find a nitrate test kit, and nitrate is dangerous to fish. Over a period of time, it will kill them. Over a period of long exposure to elevated levels of nitrate, it will cause deformities in young. It will cause health issues, and your fish won't live as long. So nitrate is a biggie that you need to test for, and oftentimes that's what we test for when we're testing water in a tank, is to see how much nitrate is in our water. And if the nitrate level is high, then we know we need to do one of several things. The next test kit that you will find is nitrite. And nitrite is less dangerous than nitrate. And nitrite is the end product of ammonia reducing bacteria and nitrate reducing bacteria. And the byproduct is, one of the byproducts is nitrite. And nitrite is less dangerous than nitrate or ammonia, but it is still dangerous if it builds up over a long period of time and the fish become accustomed to that higher nitrite level, and they're not doing well, but they're surviving, and you continually don't do your water changes as you should, and suddenly you recognize one of your fish is sick, and you suddenly do a 60% water change where you've been doing 10% water changes before, and you suddenly do a 60% water change on a tank that hasn't had regular water changes in a long time over periods of months. You can kill your fish just by the stress of changing the water that much. So nitrate is one of the tests that you can do to check the quality of water in your tank. There are tests for copper, and there are a number of smaller tests that are less used that test for heavy metals and the like. But two of the tests that you also will get in a large test kit is carbonate hardness and pH. And your carbonate hardness may be divided into two different tests. There are a couple of different ways to test for carbonate hardness. And carbonate hardness is basically the amount of calcium that is dissolved in the water. Calcium in the water makes it harder. If you live in an area with hard water, you will get water stains on the glassware in your dishes. You will have small calcium buildups on your shower heads. It will take an extra amount of soap to wash your clothes or wash your dishes to make it suds. To make suds in hard water takes more soap. So you will have to add soap, whereas others that have softer water would not. Calcium hardness buffers pH. Usually, because basically what pH per hydrogen shows you is how acidic or how base the water is. So if you've got a lot of calcium hardness, your water is probably not going to be acidic because the calcium will buffer the pH and not let it change very easily. Whereas if you have soft water, the pH can drop rapidly or rise rapidly if the case is something's added to the tank that creates calcium hardness all of a sudden. But more likely your water will move towards the acidic side. And these are just some of the small areas of water chemistry. We can go into TDS, which is total dissolved solids in the water. There are testing equipment that you can buy that will show you the TDS. And people will argue back and forth whether TDS is a more perfect testing form or whether pH is a more perfect testing form for understanding the calcium hardness that is in the water and what your water is in the end because of the calcium hardness that's in the water. TDS covers everything that's in the water. Every dissolved mineral, every dissolved organic compound, every uh, heavy metal, all the calcium. There are some things that do not test positive for TDS. So there are some things in the water that do not show up on a TDS test. But mostly all of the stuff that is dissolved in your water will show up on a TDS test. And depending on your location and what the actual water chemistry is of your local water, whether you're on a well, whether you're on a city supply, whether you collect rainwater, whether you buy bottled water, whether you have soft or hard water, will have a great deal to do with how you are able to or forced to keep fish healthy. Generally in the middle, a near neutral pH, a moderate TDS coming out of the tap, a lot of fish can survive in that. They may not thrive, they may not breed well, but a lot of fish can survive in basically neutral water. And most municipalities shoot for as close to neutral water as they can get. Now, there are a lot of municipalities that are turning out 600, 700, 800 TDS. If you are on a well in an area with a lot of calcium in the rock, you're liable to have liquid rock coming out of your tap. If you live in certain areas of the world where the water is very soft naturally, then you're going to have really soft water coming out of your tap.
Be sure and mention that if you use a water softener for your home water, that is going to be, even though it's softer water, it's going to be loaded with sodium.
Salt. Right, my wife brings up a really good point, and I had intended to get to this at some point. If you live in a hard water area and you are using a water softener system to make it where your glasses don't have spots, to make it where to get suds in your clothes washer easier, so that your shower and appliances don't calcify, toilet calcify up. Basically, that is a salt that is being added to the water. That's basically how water is softened in most systems, not all systems, but most systems use a salt to buffer the water down so that it is not as hard as it comes out of the normal tap at. That salt is going to be a real issue for your fish. Some can survive it, but most fish need unsalted water. Now, platies and some fish can survive it, but most cannot. And so in that case, if you have a water softener on your house, then you probably need to start using fish tank water from an unbuffered tap. You need to either run yourself a tap that comes straight from the municipal supply, or you need to go through extra treatment to get that water to a stage where you can use it. Now, there are ways to do it. Even if your water is being buffered, you can run an RO system, a reverse osmosis system. You could buy water from the store, but a lot of water RO water from the store has been remineralized for the flavor. It does change the flavor. Drinking raw RO water with no remineralization, really, some people don't like that taste. Um, and so, what water companies do to sell you bottled water is they remineralize it. They add minerals back to that water to give it a taste that you can drink. It's pure water, purified water, but then it's been remineralized. It's like enriched bread. They bleach everything out of it and then they add it back in again. So we're talking about a lot of different stuff here. We're talking about, hey, Susan, welcome to the stream. How's Susan doing? Susan, I'm basically rambling on for new fish keepers, and we're talking about water. And there's a lot of different ways we can talk about water. And there's a lot of science to do with water, the water that we use for our fish tanks. And while you do not have to learn all of the science, you do not have to become a science major to be able to keep fish. You can fly by the seat of your pants and manage to keep fish. I've known lots of people that have done it that don't know a whit about the nitrogen cycle or their basic water chemistry. They just throw their water in and add dechlor and never think twice about it. It is possible to do that. But if you're going to expand your fish keeping horizons and try to keep other species, or perhaps the species that you have picked from the beginning is one that requires a certain water chemistry to survive or thrive, then it behooves you to go buy a book on new fish keepers, on the nitrogen cycles, on water chemistry, and there are tons and tons and tons of books out there that have been written going on 100 years. You can go to half-price books, you can go to online used booksellers. You can pick up enough information books for a song, $1, 50 cents, $3, from all these places that will give you the information that you need in black and white in front of you. You can buy them at the store where you buy the tank and the fish. If the fish keeping bug bites you, if the fish keeping bug bites your child, your grandchild, then it behooves you or them to begin to get a handle on the nitrogen cycle of the water we keep, the water chemistry of the water we keep, and water changes. And we haven't talked about water changes yet. Now, some people in the fish keeping hobby have the wherewithal. Right. Susan says that water chemistry can determine our stock, but it's possible to buffer your water safely, and that's true. But most fish keepers live by the motto, don't fight your water. Because if you have to fight your water to make it possible for your fish to survive, then you just added another strike against you in the fish keeping hobby. So, rather than buffer water, which is possible, there's buffer up and there's buffer down. My experience of buffer up and buffer down is that it will last a little while, but then it will suddenly swing back to where it was before. And if there's one thing that our fish don't like, it's Sudden changes. VB23, welcome to the stream, says water companies need to be more friendly. My friend can't even use his tap. And there are a great many people that are in that boat, VB23. There are a lot of municipalities that are either dealing with such wrong water to begin with that they're treating that they can't turn out something that's safe for fish. They call it safe for human beings, but we can't even be sure that it's safe for human beings anymore in a lot of places. Just talk to somebody in Flint, Michigan. They turn on their tap and they get flames, or they turn on their tap and they get rusty water, or they turn on their tap and drink it and get ill. So a lot of times government is our friend. A lot of times government can be our adversary. And as far as fish keepers go, the government and the water municipalities are often our adversaries, not our friends. They will find some bacteria bloom in the water that they need to treat immediately to make it palatable for human beings. And they will dump a huge amount of chloramine and chlorine in the water suddenly and not tell fish keepers. There's no advanced warning system that I'm aware of, although there are some systems that have information that you can access. But they will put a ton of chloramine in the water and you will do a water change and your normal dechlor treatment will not be up to snuff and your fish could die. Cobweb Cavern says, for your information, anyone in the UK watching can obtain a great deal of info on your water from your local supplier's website. For example, I got this report from their webpage, which is updated regularly, and it gives the magnesium, the calcium, the hardness, the CaCO3, and in several different degrees, and the hardness level is soft. So Cobweb Caverns has soft water that's being coming out of the tap. VB23 says,
I'm running to the library.
okay, doll. VB23 says, my water has been fine actually. I use tap with a dechlorinator, and most of us will be in that situation. Most of us will be able to simply add dechlor, and for most of the species that we're going to keep, BB23 says he will flame his water company if his fish does die and they do not inform me of changes. Yeah, well, sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't work. Cobweb Cavern says loves peaty, lovely peaty water. It's what makes the whiskey so good, and that is true. A lot of the same chemistry that goes on in fish keeping is the same chemistry in making good whiskey. And the two of them are not as far apart as you might think sometimes. So in this first introductory welcome to the fish hobby, you need to know about water post. I think it's important that we've shown the range of the science and the basics of water chemistry, the different ways that it's possible to change your water if the water does not meet the needs of your fish. Susan talked about buffering. I think of buffering more in the sense of you can add wood to a tank, wood that's made for aquariums, wood that you collect that you know will be okay in aquariums. Um, Sometimes you can pick up wood in your local waterways. If your local waterways are safe, that wood's already been leached out. Most of the chemicals and tannins have been leached out of that wood. It's like driftwood. Wood will drop the pH of the water in the tank. It will still leach some tannins into the water, and those tannins and the oils in the wood that is safe for aquariums. There are some woods that are not safe for aquariums. The wood that is safe for aquariums will leach some tannins into the water and will just basically by its nature slowly lower the pH in a tank. And Susan's right on the money, saying that adding wood to lower pH or crushed coral to raise the hardness for guppies is right on the money. And crushed coral will add calcium. Bleached actual coral, coral that you can buy at fish stores that is actual coral that has been bleached out and is for sale, will work. That's where the crushed coral comes from. Any kind of calcium rock, Texas Holy Rock, or any of the rocks that have calcium in them will slowly break down over time in soft water and leach calcium into the water. So there are a lot of ways that you can naturally buffer your tank. There are a whole variety of different ways. And even adding plants will lower pH. So rather than use a chemical buffer which might suddenly stop buffering and let the water bounce right back to where it was before you started buffering, I would suggest that a new fish keeper search out the information and learn natural ways to buffer water. The last thing that I think we should talk about on water, and we've only lightly covered things like RO water and even really chemistry, but the last thing on the first video that I think we should talk about is water changes. I've got to tell people that are new to the hobby that depending on how large a tank you keep, water changes can be a lot of work. If you are siphoning off 50% of the water in a 55-gallon tank into a 5-gallon bucket and carrying it outside and dumping it, here's a tip, in your flower garden or your vegetable garden, because there's a lot of nitrite in that water, and that's one of the main ingredients to fertilizer. So your fish tank water can be used in your garden or for your flowers. But if you're going to siphon a 50% change on a 55-gallon tank, you're talking about 25 gallons of water. That's 5-gallon buckets that you need to carry out and dump. And Susan's saying use powerhead pumps and or pythons for water changes, and I would highly recommend that new fish keepers look those up if they're into a much larger tank. A 5-gallon tank, if you do a 50% water change, which I highly recommend in a 5-gallon tank, then that's just 2.5 gallons. So you can change that pretty regularly at 50% without doing too much work. But this hobby can very easily get to many more gallons of fish keeping tanks than you would have ever dreamed. And you need to understand that water changes can be worked. Now, it's possible to use pythons to make it easier. Susan is talking about being a graduate of the Bucket Brigade, except for her smaller tanks. Susan is someone that is still relatively new to the hobby. She's our fish fam mom, that we call her, and you can go to her channel and look at her videos and get a really good experience of what it's like to go through this process, because Susan herself has gone through this process. She's learned the hard way. She has expanded her hobby and has many more tanks than she used to. And so she understands what this new to the hobby is like. Everybody that's in this stream is equally viable for you to go check out their channel and learn their fish keeping methods and learn their experiences. And we all do water changes. Now, some of us have the wherewithal, and our hobby has gotten large enough that we have automatic water changers that continually cycle the water. And when you can do automatic water changes in a whole fish room, then it takes a huge load off of the work involved with keeping fish. Cobweb Caverns rightly points out that live plants can help reduce water changes down to 0 once you get a bit of experience. And that's true, because plants require nitrate and nitrites to grow. Now, they require lots of other things too. Some require a lot of calcium, some require a lot of magnesium, some require a bunch of different kinds of things. But they will continually pull those elements out of the substrate where they're planted if they're root feeders, and out of the water if they feed through their leaves. And while the statement that Cobweb Caverns makes is that live plants can help reduce water changes, the down to 0 part, I think that you need to be a really solid fish keeper to get water changes down to 0. Because I think that most new fish keepers tend to overfeed their fish, tend to not observe their fish closely enough to recognize when one has died and might be in a corner or underneath a plant or wedged in a rock somewhere dead. And it's usually only by vacuuming that tank and closely observing your fish that you recognize that one is missing and start looking for it, or looking for a dead body to get that out of the tank before it causes a huge ammonia spike in your tank. If you've got a 5-gallon tank and one of your fish dies, that's going to be a very precarious situation. You need to do water changes regularly. Hey, G-Bear, welcome to the stream. We're just about to shut down here, but welcome to the stream. Doing regular water changes is a way to spend time looking at your tank, spend time observing your fish, and I think that's critical for new fish keepers, to do water changes and at least use that time to really closely observe what's going on in their tank. Closely observe the fish and closely observe the whole ecosystem of the tank itself. Now, how much water do you need to change? If you talk to Mel, Capote Mel, and he has a channel on YouTube, and if you talked or read of Jack Watley, who has passed recently, if you were back in the 50s or the 60s or the 70s, those guys would tell you that you needed to do 50% water change a day. That's how much water change you can do. And 50% water change, if you've got 5 200-gallon tanks, a 50% water change on 5 200-gallon tanks is a lot of water change every day. Every day. Every day those guys will do 50 or 60%. Because back then, that was required to really keep your fish in optimal health. They needed that much fresh water every day to stay in optimal health. And many people today follow that same thing. The people that have automatic water changers going, they're doing 50% a day because it's automatically done. It's automatically piped in and it automatically flows out and runs through a sump system or goes to waste, and the water is continually being changed. But that doesn't mean that you need to do 50% of your tank size every day. Your fish might do well with 20% a week. Now, if you're running a 5-gallon tank or a 10-gallon tank, then I think you should be doing 20% every few days. Like every third day, you should do 20% water change. And I would give you that advice because a 5-gallon tank is a very small amount of water. And the size of our tank versus the stocking ratio in our tank, how much fish we have in our tank, creates a ratio that gives you an idea of the buffer you have between yourself and disaster. If something goes wrong in 5 gallons of water, and even a lightly stocked tank, maybe more towards medium stocking, one fish dying can create a domino effect that kills every fish in that tank if it goes untreated. The water quality, because of the amount of water, can go bad so quickly that you need to be very, very careful and observant and Johnny on the spot. If something's going wrong, you need to be in there doing a water change. You need to be in there getting that dead fish out of the tank. See you, V-Stag. Have a good weekend, man. Have a good week. I always recommend to over-tank your fish. If the recommended tank for 6 guppies is a 5-gallon tank, then I recommend that you put those 6 guppies in a 20-gallon tank or a 40-gallon tank, because that creates more buffer between you and disaster. Now, 6 guppies in a 40-gallon tank, that's way above what normal stocking rates are. But if one of those guppies dies, a 40-gallon tank is going to have a lot more buffer in it before it's suddenly a disaster. So, yes, you can put 6 guppies in a 5 gallon tank, and you can do perfectly well with them. But you are going to need to be regular with your water changes, and you are going to need to watch closely. Cobweb Cavern says, I think it's important to understand why we change water. To me, for beginners, the key factor is to maintain nitrate levels and below 40 ppm. And there's other reasons, but for a noob, that will be the main. And I would only add to that, Cobwebs, that what really we're trying to do is to maintain nitrite levels below a certain amount. If you've got plants in a tank, if you have there are ways where the nitrite is removed from the water. That is, thank you for stopping by, Susan. Yes, you read the nitrate, and that shows you how much nitrate there is still to convert to nitrite. And above a certain level, and Cobweb Caverns is saying 40 parts per million, there are some people will tell you 20 parts per million. Some will say 60 is okay. There are a lot of different advice levels in there, and 40 is a pretty good one, because if it's above 40, it's going to be accumulating so much faster. So if you test your 5 gallon tank and it shows 40 parts per million nitrate, and you do a 50% water change on that tank, then test again for nitrate, you should look to see about 20 parts per million, because you've removed half of the water and replaced it with water that doesn't have nitrate in it, or doesn't have very much nitrate in it, hopefully. If you're getting high levels of nitrate out of your tap, then you need to be really careful about doing water changes. So if you want to maintain 40 parts per million and you test your nitrate level and you get 30 parts per million and you think that it should stay around 20 to give you a buffer between a problem, then you might need to do a 25% water change to drop that 30 down to 20. Or you might need to do a 30% water change or a 40% water change. But most likely, ammonia and nitrate should always be 0. So I'm transposing nitrite and nitrate. Yikes. Okay, just completely ignore everything I said. You need to be worried about nitrate first. I'm messing up the nitrogen cycle. Nitrite first and then nitrate. And whereas I'm saying Cobweb Caverns says nitrate should be below 40, I'm talking nitrite. I'm getting nitrates and nitrites confused. Yep, that's par for the course from me. Anyway, thank you for correcting me. I'm always needing. I'm dependent on the help of strangers. So here's a person that is giving advice to new fish keepers and giving them the wrong advice. But I think you can still get to the parts of the advice that you need to, even through my, yes, Stella. I'm dependent on the kindness of strangers and riding a streetcar named Desire. Okay. Every place in this video that I've said nitrate, replace it with nitrite. And every place that I've said nitrate, replace it with nitrate. It's not too hard. And you're right, I have made that mistake all through the video. Yeah, I don't think too many are going to get streetcar named Desire references. Okay. Watch your nitrate levels. Change water according to your nitrate levels. If you think the nitrate in your tank should be 40 parts per million and you get a reading of 70 parts per million, you're probably going to need to do a 50% water change to get that nitrate reading down. If you're reading 20, you might be able to skip a week and watch what it does. You might have enough plants in your tank that they are holding the nitrate level in your tank. The amount of waste that's being created and consumed by bacteria will be held at 20 parts per million, and you can get away with skipping a week. I'd still do a 20% just because I want to watch my fish and I want to keep the water moving through my tank. I don't want to set up old tank syndrome. Anyway, I've run over and I've obviously goofed yet again. And thanks to Cobweb Caverns for catching my goof and correcting me. And that's what people in the fish keeping hobby will do. They will help you correct mistakes that you're making. Everybody that's in this hobby makes mistakes. I don't care who they are or how good they are or how long they've been in this hobby. They will make mistakes, and it helps to have other people around you that are watching out for you, that are helping you, that are giving you the benefit of their experience. And that's what makes this hobby go round. That's what turns this hobby from a solitary pleasure to a gregarious, wide-ranging, worldwide hobby. All right. Everybody have a good rest of your weekend. Have a good week. Hopefully we're headed out of winter. I don't know whether Puxatawny Phil saw his shadow or not. I don't really care. I'm done with winter. It's over. I'm over it. Let's get through the last of it and into spring. All right. Good luck with your fish keeping, guys. And next week, I'm going to go through water again, because obviously I need to do more homework. But there are other topics in water itself that we can cover. Thanks for spending some of your time with me. Thanks for correcting me. Thanks for adding beneficial comments in the chat. And good luck.